Hi, I'm Scott Miller. Welcome to my Top Performance blog. I have the pleasure today of speaking with Dr. Randy Moss. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm great, man. How long have we known each other?
Since 2000. So we're now 17 years into our friendship.
That's right. And I think we met, I was coming up because you were doing some innovative work at the time in Alaska.
Correct. We brought you up in 2001 and then subsequently a few times after that. And that's how we got started.
What were you doing there?
So I had just relocated from being out into Bush, Alaska, helping to organize and integrate systems for Alaska Natives. And I had started a corporation called Co-Occurring Disorders Institute. And our intent was to bring science into practice. I believe that we actually did some good work in getting people to start thinking about feedback cultures. And then later on, as we started thinking about implementation and then ultimately into deliberate practice, I believe that we planted some seeds.
And what are you up to now?
So we moved from Alaska back to my home state of Utah. So we call this the lower 48, and Alaska was still in the United States.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who don't believe that. And sometimes when I traveled in Europe, I would say I was an Alaskan, and that allowed people to not necessarily always have the gruff American response to me. So that was great. Kind of almost like being Canadian, I think.
That's right.
So right now, I do a variety of consultation services. I do some work in trying to promote fit and deliberate practice, working with systems on implementing evidence-based practices of their choice, helping them understand the steps.
And Randy, you know, you've always been on the cutting edge. When you were working in Alaska, it really was a period of time when we were trying to reduce as a field silos between mental health and substance abuse. And now you're on this whole idea of implementation, and in particular, implementing both trauma-informed services and feedback-informed treatment. It's one of the reasons why we asked you for our latest book, which will be released very shortly, to contribute a chapter on implementation. And we paired you up with Vanessa to talk about what she had learned in their implementation process, what you've learned over time. How about giving us some highlights about that?
Well, writing this chapter was both daunting and exciting. But what mostly it did was reinforce what I knew about implementation science. And it turned out to be a lived example. I know that we had at least 8 full rewrites, and each piece of them was probably rewritten that many times.
Okay.
And then we also went outside as one of our consistent messages of getting a consultant or somebody from the outside to help large agencies in particular. We went out and got an outside editor.
I don't think anybody really knows or can appreciate, unless they've done it, just the amount of work that goes into a 30 to 40 page chapter, and you spell it out so beautifully and painfully about the process. But I'll tell you that your chapter really is a jewel in this new book. Tell us a little bit about what you learned.
So
besides, you're never going to write another chapter for us again.
Oh, actually, I would love to write another chapter. I think I learned some things about this, but I was using that as a parallel to our experience and to my understanding of now about 20 years of helping systems change. And so I think our takeaway was that number one is this is a patient endeavor. Anyone who believes that you can implement a good idea either by fiat, by edict, or by force is, I think, mistaken. That the resistances that are natural actually get hardened as one tries to do it both in an abbreviated time frame as well as without all the voices at the table. The second one is that planning and replanning and chucking old plans and coming up with new plans is really the essential aspect of being successful. That without having administrative and leadership buy-in that is articulated on a blueprint that is both immediate and then long-term, and then from there you can build up resourcing and who to bring on and what to bring on and steps of measurement for milestones, you end up having a mess at the end.
So 3 things I heard you mention again and again, and that was a patient endeavor. You have to be ready that this is going to take time. You can't force this. The second thing, and related to that, is there has to be commitment and leadership, because while you're not trying to force, you do need to support the process to birth this process. And the third is a willingness to go back to the drawing board again and again and rework this as feedback comes in about what works and what doesn't work in the implementation process.
Right.
Perfect. And what is a realistic timeline? Did you get any chapter?
Well, Fixon would say 5 to 7 years. Ours kind of moved back a little earlier. We started to see that some cultural changes were starting to mature and become solid around year 3 and 4.
Okay.
I think that ultimate sustainability is probably at 5 years. Mm-hmm. So
in terms of potential failures, because I know that you also took time to think through failed implementation efforts. Any lessons from that?
Well, the first is making sure before you pull the start trigger for either initial implementation or general implementation that you really do actually have leadership buy-in, that they aren't just being reactive, but they are now being converted. And why I say that is that we've had cases, and we can see cases where when it got rough and there were alternative factors coming in outside, other ideas or something else, that the commitment started to waffle a little bit and it quickly falls apart. That was one of the biggest failures. The second one was inadequate resourcing. People thought they could do a dime's worth of work on a nickel's worth of budget. And that goes to the 2 points about time, that you have to resource for an extended period of time. And you also have to do 2 other things that are important in resourcing. One is there is a cost. There's a cost to getting the computer system or the use of some kind of aggregation tool for this information. And that could include resourcing for a consultant, for training times. Then there is also a piece that we articulate, which is called carve out, that in every type of learning circumstance, you cannot expect the same productivity quotient or productivity level when somebody's learning a new skill. The third thing that we both hit upon was turnover.
Yes.
When you have invested a year or 6 months or 2 years with individuals who are now advocates, who are strong, not only believers, but have their data and have experienced the satisfaction of feedback-based therapy, and all of a sudden they leave, there's a huge hole. And the fourth one is insufficient attention to toxic resistors.
Yeah.
So Roger's kind of idea of how groups come together from early adopters are the ones excited, been waiting for this, for the confirmation for themselves for everywhere, and actually administration needs to rein them in or you get drift and you end up having separate silos within one big agency, and that's not good either. Then we have the fence sitters who are just waiting to kind of get on board wherever the wind's blowing. They all think everything's a fad and they can just continue to do their own work. So good people. And then you have resistors. And then inside those resistors are a group of toxic people. And oftentimes they have unusual amount of power, both subtle and then overt disruptive powers. And one of the things that we try to point out a little bit is the administration, when they are committed to this cultural change, be whatever it is, has to be willing to recognize, identify, and directly deal with these toxic resistors.
Failed implementations, inadequate resourcing, not recognizing that when people are losing or learning new skills, rather, that their productivity is likely to decline on other measures, perhaps, and not carving out the time to devote to that. Not dealing or addressing turnover. You're going to have people disappear, and if the implementation becomes focused on those individuals rather than the broader cultural change, then the implementation can suffer. And then insufficient attention to toxic resistors, that very small group of people that no matter what is done, no matter what supports are provided, work against the implementation efforts.
I think you've said them well.
Perfect.
I think the idea that the turnover is that one of the cautions early on, as you said, is the larger picture. But many change or transformational projects are kind of the cult of personality. And until you kind of relieve yourself of it's John's push or Sally's motion, it's from the top down, or you put a name to it instead of driven by a goal and a well-reasoned, researched, and structured goal, that turnover actually becomes even more damaging.
Perfect. Well, and Randy, you've laid out these steps so nicely and in such concrete detail, as well as your experiences. The passion and the heart really comes through in the chapter that you and Vanessa wrote. Where can people get a hold of you if they wanted to chat with you further about this? Have you talk with them about their implementation efforts of fit or trauma-informed care?
You could email me at iccrmoss@gmail.com. And make sure in your subject line you tell me what it's about.
Perfect. Hey, Randy, thanks for taking the time with us to talk about your chapter and the new book, and wish you best continued success in the future.
Oh, thank you, Scott.
You said you wanted a song for your mother.